Wham! Talk 1600. You're catching the drift. Conservative talk. Intelligent conversations on local, state, and national issues with Gary Wellings, chief editor of the Current newspaper and Current Online. Join in the conversation at 734-822-1600. And now, your host, Gary Wellings.
Hey, and good Saturday afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to catch our drift. Joining me in studio, Ipsy Ed Bonderenka.
Howdy.
How do? Top of the radio dial to you.
Oh, folks try to see him in his green fedora. And he's just on his green shirt, too. He's just a shining example of petty.
St. Patty's Day is one of my favorites, man. I try to take it off of work if it's a work day, but luckily tomorrow is not a work day, and I get to go out and imbibe and have my big Irish breakfast in the morning. And
you won't be doing it at Burroughs.
No, I won't be doing it at Burroughs, but no, I've got my favorite places, which I will not reveal at this point because they're not a sponsor.
Don't tip off the police.
No, I'm always very careful. I take my time, and I'm home by noon normally. I like to have my breakfast and a beer, which is unusual.
Green beer?
No, I don't do the green beer. There's so much better things to drink than green beer.
Guinness?
I do, yes. Yep.
It's got taste.
Yeah, absolutely. So happy St. Patty's Day to everyone, and let's take a minute to take care of one of our advertisers. If you're looking for a new overhead door, or a new garage door, or to repair, replace, or just do a garage door checkup, a tune-up, you want to call Overhead Door in Whitmore Lake, 734-449-0400. That's 734-449-0400. Or you can go to ohdwhitmorelake@gmail.com, send them, and they'll send them an email, and they'll call you back. So, you don't think about garage doors until something happens.
Until you
right?
can't get out or can't get in.
Up and down at least twice a day, right?
Yeah.
Most people, like myself, that's how I get in and out of my house.
We don't use the front door.
I don't
We use the garage
front
door.
Yep.
The kids know the code.
Yeah.
They don't have a key.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you do that. And what we do every Saturday on The Drift is go over the news that we put on thedailydrift.com. And if you're not going there, you should. It's
the news you need to know.
Thank you. News from around the world, across the globe, and even right here at home. So we're going to start. I know there's a lot to get to. We've got this horrific shooting, and we're not going to say that guy's name down in New Zealand, and we've got the veto and lots of stuff to talk about, but I wanted to stay a little closer to home because this is a huge issue for us in Michigan, whether you're just a regular driver or a commercial driver or a small business owner. Our governor, our newly elected Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is going to be asking for a 45-cent increase in our gas tax, delivered in 15-cent increments over the next year. That's what she wants to do.
Did we play the audio last week where she said she wouldn't ask for 20?
Yes, okay. We did. And so a friend of mine at work showed me an article this week in Crane's Business Magazine, and I thought about it, and I went, oh, my gosh, there's another great alternative. So there are alternatives. And so I got hold of the author, and it's John Mozeno. My eyes are getting so bad. And I asked him if he could come on for a little bit today. So John Mozeno is calling in. And, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, John, fantastic article. I had no idea that corporate subsidies were as big as they are in this state. But before we get into that, do you want to tell me a little bit about what you've done and maybe tell us what your website is so that people can follow up on this?
Sure. I'm actually the president of a relatively new organization. We call it the Center for Economic Accountability. And what we did is I and some colleagues who care about the issue of corporate subsidies and incentives and economic development policy sort of looked around and realized that most of the opposition to these deals and most of the people questioning these deals sort of in any organized way were folks who were coming at this from sort of the left, call them Democrats, progressive liberals, whatever you want to do. And they come at it from a perspective of fairness and equity and things like that. And that's valuable and that's worthwhile. But we thought that there needed to be a voice for people who come from the other side of the equation, who come at it from a standpoint of limited government and free markets and individual liberty and the level playing field where government's not putting its thumb on the scale of which businesses are going to succeed and which businesses are going to fail. So we got together with a couple of people and who have some background on this. I spent a long time in the private sector as a marketing and PR guy, working with downtown development authorities and stuff. So I've got experience on this from sort of the side of trying to promote it. One of my board members is a former assistant city planner in Houston, master's in urban planning. So we come at this not as sort of amateurs, but as people who actually know what's going on. And what we're starting off is just looking for places where we can talk about accountability and transparency and trying to get people to realize that overwhelmingly all of the money that states and localities hand out in these deals really isn't necessary, and it really doesn't help and get people thinking differently about that.
Okay, that's good. And that's what, I mean, even last week we were talking about, and I think you've got a history with Michigan Capital Confidential too, right?
Yeah, I actually, my most recent job was I was a vice president at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy here in Michigan. I was the vice president for marketing and communications and worked very closely with the CapCon team there who do great work. I guess theoretically I did a little writing for it, but that was my job at the Mackinac Center. So
right. So last week we talked a little bit about it, not only Gretchen Whitmer kind of hiding this during her campaign, but also the fact that on CapCon last week there was an article that said about 40% of this new proposed gas tax would not even go to the roads. Can you propound a little bit on that about how the money comes in and then all of a sudden it comes out the back door and you're not getting everything that we should be for the roads?
Yeah, and that's one of those places where I certainly, I have a basic understanding of it. I don't claim to be as much of an expert as my friends and former colleagues at Mackinac. James Homan, who's the director of fiscal policy there, is sort of the king in the state as far as I'm concerned at looking at that stuff. But basically, the sort of it all boils down to, once a dollar goes into state government, with very few exceptions, it can go anywhere. And these things of where taxes go in, if it's just a general fund revenue, that it can go right back out the door. So there's issues with the fact that we charge sales tax on the gas tax, and that sales tax is how we fund, among other things, education in the state. It gets really complicated, but at the end of the day, it's a function of the state brings in a heck of a lot of money every year, as you know, I know, your listeners know. And it likes to have more money, and it's going to keep on asking for more money until we tell it not to do that. So the specifics of what would be going on with the gas tax, I do know that, among other things, I've also worked in the past trying to get people to see a little bit of reason on mass transit and public transit funding with the Regional Transit Authority here in southeastern Michigan. I know that they've got earmarks in there for taking the gas tax and putting it into things like light rail and stuff like that, or high-speed rail that makes no sense for us here in Michigan. So it's all a mess that way. Yeah,
that's been one of my pet peeves for a long time. The people want to run this rail from Howell to Ann Arbor to try and alleviate the traffic on US 23. And they even went ahead, they spent a ton of money on surveys and everything else at this point. But one of the things that bothered me is they asked, when they did a survey, they asked a lot of people in Ann Arbor if they wanted the light rail from Howell to Ann Arbor. Well, people in Ann Arbor aren't going to use the light rail from Howell to Ann Arbor. And I thought, what are you doing? Why are you trying to rig the survey by having a bunch of tree-hugging people from Ann Arbor try and get people off the US 23. It never made sense, but I don't want to get deep in the weeds on that. You were talking about if we can remove corporate tax breaks. You want to go over some of those figures and let people know really how much money we are giving to corporations that we probably should not be.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really good point, because I think the first thing people have to understand that most people don't, because it really doesn't register on most people's radar all that often, is that we don't actually know as a state how much money we have given specific companies in tax breaks. The state has handed out literally billions of dollars to individual companies in tax credits that they can sort of cash in whenever they feel like it, and then when people have gone and asked, hey, like who did you give those credits to? The state has said through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, oh, that's private taxpayer information. Like, We know, I mean, in reality, we know that it's primarily the automakers, but in terms of which ones they are and how much they actually have, the fact that the taxpayers aren't allowed to know which other taxpayers aren't paying their bills or have been allowed not to pay their bills seems inappropriate. So to some extent, we don't know exactly how much is out there because there's such a culture of secrecy and against transparency in economic development. But some of the real high-level numbers, we know that in 2017, in total, our state government and the municipalities that reported it, as they're supposed to under new accounting rules, reported that there was $944 million in money that they didn't receive because of tax breaks they'd cut, specific tax breaks for economic development. So that's $944 million in taxes they would have received that year had they not made those deals. And that's just a one-year total.
So that's almost $1 billion.
That's almost $1 billion. It's probably more than that, actually, and that's just the tax money that they didn't receive. That doesn't count direct subsidies going out. That doesn't count the cost of interest on bonds that they floated to finance things. That doesn't count the salaries of the people who run all these programs. I mean, we went and looked the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the state's sort of primary economic development, and the has a $22 million a year budget just for salaries and benefits for its employees. I noted in the Cranes piece you're talking about, I noted that if we're complaining about fixing the roads, 2017, the head of the MEDC made almost twice as much money as the head of the State Department of Transportation.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking at right here in your article. $165,000 for the Department of Transportation Director, Kirk Stoodle, and $283,000 for the CEO of the MEDC, Stephen Arwood. Which of those guys really brings value add to us? I'm assuming it's Kirk Stoodle, not MEDC guy.
Yeah, I mean, who retired this past year, or at least went on to a different job. I mean, he's a licensed professional engineer. I mean, he's got, an actual engineering background in things like fixing roads. If all else failed, we could send him out there with a shovel and some asphalt to patch holes. But that's the thing. And then when you talk about $22 million, I mean, that's maybe 1/100th or so of the amount of money we're told we need to fix the roads. But you do that 1/100th often enough, and it adds up. And as I said, you can hire a lot more guys in reflective vests than you can investment managers. I've done highway construction. I know how much I got paid versus an investment manager was getting paid.
Right.
It just seems like if obviously, every decision when it comes to state government and state budgeting is what's our priority? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And if we are saying that our infrastructure is the single most important thing out there, and we got to fix this, and that it's hurting our state's economy by scaring off companies, by draining money out of people's pockets with car repairs and the like, then let's treat it like that, because the evidence on the other side is that overwhelmingly the money that we spend on economic development just doesn't matter. I mean, it's a tiny percentage, even when you accept the assertions of these folks about how important it is.
Right. And it's both sides of the aisle. We've got Democrats and Republicans who are loving these corporate subsidies, I'm assuming because they get some kind of a kickback on the election front from these companies and lobbyists, right?
Well, actually, that's the thing is that you're absolutely right. That this is absolutely a bipartisan problem. It's not a function of Republicans or Democrats. The nice thing is, for someone in my perspective, is that the opposition to them is also bipartisan. I mean, there was a fun piece a little while back in National Review talking about how they finally found something they could agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on, which was that she was opposed to the Amazon deal in New York, and so were they. So the issue, though, isn't really, and people sort of assume that there's this corruption that goes into these deals. And I mean, sure, that happens sometimes, but the real problem is that there doesn't even need to be corruption for this to be worth politicians' time, because at the end of the day,